Hi, everybody. Welcome to Tech Talks. Today, we're going to be talking about fire protection in data centers. My name is Shaun Kramer. I'm the Senior Director of Technical Services and Training at Viking. And with me today is Caleb Case, who is the Manager of Technical Services and Training.
Thank you, Shaun.
So, Caleb, we get a lot of questions about data centers, and there's some that we get more common than others. What would be some of the common questions we do get with data centers?
Absolutely. So today we're going to be diving into a pretty hot topic, fire protection in data centers. And because so much is at stake, because these are critical facilities, and there's so much to deal with, I just wanted to kind of start simple with what exactly is a data center?
Well, that's a great question. And today it's somewhat difficult to get to the bottom of what's actually considered a data center. There's a lot of questions that have to be asked and answered in order to know how to properly protect a data center and what's really considered one. A great example would be in NFPA. If you go into the annex in light hazard, under office areas, it says office area, comma, data processing room. So are data centers really still light hazard day? That's a question that has come up with it because a lot of engineers are requiring a 0.15 or a 0.2 density. FM 5-32 actually requires a 0.2 density, which most people would associate with like an ordinary hazard type density instead of a light hazard. So I was kind of curious as to when that was introduced into the standard for light hazard. And I started going back to the previous editions, and it actually went back to the year I was born as to when that was put in for data processing rooms. So I want to sit here and tell you that it's old, outdated information, but that's kind of a conflict of interest there. But even going to the 1990s, when you look at data centers, they've changed a lot since the 90s. In the 90s, what you would have is if your equipment went down, you had a lot of downtime in your data center. And a lot of subfloors were used. Subfloors were used in the 1990s through the early 2000s. And you start to see data centers actually moving away from that these days.
Right. Oh, so because people hear the term all the time, sometimes we might just picture a dark room with server lights, but there's actually more to it than that. So not all data centers are going to be created equal. So what are the four main um, types of data centers that we do typically deal with?
So there's four different types of data centers that you would see today. You have your enterprise data center. This is the data center that's specifically created for the companies with a data center already in mind for it. So it's constructed to what their needs are and it's made specifically for them. It can be on-site or it can be off-site, but it's specifically made for that company. Another type of data center would be your cloud storage data center, for example, a subscription-based data center. That's really what, you and I would use in our personal email. Sometimes you will get that request to add more storage data for a subscription-based format for your personal emails. That's your cloud style data center. There's the other two kinds. You have your co-location data center and you have your managed service data center. And the thing about that is the buildings are owned by somebody else. With a co-location data center, what the company's doing is they're installing their equipment in the building, and then they're doing the maintenance and the upgrades on the equipment themselves. With a managed service data center, somebody else still owns the building, the infrastructure itself. But in that case, with a managed service data center, they're actually doing the maintenance and the upgrades on the equipment for the company. So some minor difference between a co-location and a managed service, but the other two are enterprise and cloud service.
Interesting. And speaking of some of the differences, I've also heard of data centers being described by tiers, like tier 1 or maybe tier 4. And that tier rating really changes how we approach protection. So how do we factor tiers into the different types of data centers?
Yeah, so when you start with tier one, that's your lowest level of a tier for a data center there. Tier one would be where the equipment cost is actually the main focus. Spending less on the equipment costs. You're not as worried about downtime. There's routine downtime for maintenance and upgrades of a tier one type data center. Tier 2 has a little bit of redundancy built in. You don't get that with Tier 1 with the redundancy. Once you get up to Tier 2, there's planned downtime, but it's very limited for the planned downtime. And you're starting to see more of a focus on the concern with business interruption than you would in a Tier 1 instance. Getting to Tier 3, that's your next level up. There's multiple built-in redundancies. You can have off-site locations with a backup for it. Tier 3 is what many larger businesses are using commonly today, with multiple backups, and your downtime is planned. Either you can maintain the equipment and upgrade it without any downtime, or it's very minimal to once a year that you have that planned downtime for it. Now, Tier 4, that's where you're getting into the mission critical facility. That's where it's fully fault tolerant. You have backups in place so that you never have any downtime. You do not want to schedule any downtime for the maintenance or the upgrades of the system. And all these different tiers, they factor into what type of fire protection system you would be looking at as well.
Wonderful. Probably not where they're going to keep my fantasy football statistics.
No, that would probably be in your Tier 1.
Okay. Now, here's something that always is a little bit confusing. When someone talks about density in a data center, what exactly are they referring to?
Yeah, so when we talk about density in fire protection, mostly we're talking about how much water's coming out of a sprinkler. And when we really look at how we approach a project, we're looking at the square footage area of the project, which is still a concern with data centers for how we lay out the sprinklers for the protection of them. But with data centers, you're also looking at the density. And when we talk about density, we're talking about how many kilowatts per rack in the data center. So like your standard density would be like a 10 kilowatt rack in that area, where once you start to get into a higher density, you can see upwards of 100 plus kilowatt racks in a data center. That's really once you start to get into your AI data centers. So when we talk about that, when we talk about like a standard 10 kilowatt rack, that we're looking at, you're looking at a cost of around 10 to 15,000 per server rack in that data center. But once you get into these larger server racks, you could be over $1 million per rack. So once again, a question that has to be asked and answered to know what type of protection you're going to have in that area for your fire protection system.
All right. So we've got all of this high-powered equipment packed in there, which leads really to the big question. What actually causes a fire in a data center?
Well, the most common cause of fires in data centers would be the electrical wiring in the data center. Other causes that are commonly seen would be overheating of the equipment due to improper cooling, improper maintenance of the equipment over time, or human error during installation or handling of the equipment. Those would be your most common causes for fires in your data centers.
Okay, makes sense. Technology has changed a lot over the years, and it's really been wild. That's the main reason why we're talking about this topic today.
Yep.
But maybe we can unpack that a little bit. How has fire protection really evolved over the years for data center systems?
Yeah, so going back to the 1960s, when data centers really weren't for public use, mainly for military use, your type of fire protection systems, that's when halon came out. So halon was your gas suppression option, and then for standard sprinkler systems, you were looking at a wet pipe sprinkler system. So halon was really commonly used, but then it was found to be not environmentally friendly.
Okay.
So in the 1990s, there was a big change because the production of halon was banned in the 90s, and you started to see chemical clean agents being used, like your FK5112, your HFC 227 for some of the examples, as your chemical clean agents to replace halon. And you also saw pre-action systems being used. But going back to what I was talking about in the 90s, where the equipment that you had in the area, if it went down, that meant business interruption. You didn't have a backup of a backup like we do today. So with that, with the systems, you'd have your clean agent system as your initial protection, and then per the building code, you were required to have a sprinkler system, and you had your pre-action system as your primary system to protect the building. So the anticipation was the clean agent system would activate first, and then the pre-action system was there to back it up if needed. So that brings us up to the 90s, and that's pretty much what we saw through the 90s, through the early 2000s. But moving to today, for one thing, the chemical clean agents, similar to halon, have been found to not be environmentally friendly. So on top of that, there's so much redundancy here. For example, where we're at the Viking facility in Caledonia, Michigan, there's a large company in Grand Rapids who has a data center in their corporate headquarters in Grand Rapids, but every day we drive by one of the remote data centers here, and usually you don't see any cars there. You occasionally you see a car there, when they're doing maintenance or upgrades. So what we're seeing these days is so much backup where you have off-site, on-site locations, and even if there were to be a fire in one of the locations for the data center, it doesn't necessarily mean business downtime like it did in the 90s. Whereas if the equipment gets damaged, you're not up and running until that's replaced. So what we're commonly seeing being used these days is pre-action systems. Just going with a single interlock pre-action system or a double interlock pre-action system as your fire protection option. Now, that being said, we were just talking about densities of, the data centers. When we start talking about the equipment and the server racks being 1 million plus per rack, you're a little bit more worried about the equipment being protected than you would if it's a standard density rack. So you might be looking at something like our Oxio system using our inert gas suppression system for the protection and that type of occupancy because you want to protect the equipment as well.
Okay. Um, Kind of switching back to sprinklers, which everyone kind of tends to think of at first when you think of fire protection. What type of sprinklers are going to be commonly used in a data center?
So there's when I was talking about how some engineers are specifying a 0.15, 0.2 density, and FM requires a 0.2 densities for protection of data centers in 5-32 as well. You start to see your 5, 6, and 8K sprinklers commonly being used for those densities for standard coverage sprinklers. And the reason you might go with standard coverage sprinklers in a data center over extended coverage would be because I was talking about in the 90s, you saw subfloors a lot, and in the early 2000s, well, that's where all the wiring was ran. Now what you see is the wiring and all the cable trays being ran out in the aisles right along the servers. So that poses a couple challenges. It creates more obstructions. So you might have your sprinklers spaced closer together with more obstructions, but it also creates a unique challenge that we're really not used to. Usually when you look at obstructions, you're trying to spray below the obstruction to get your floor area coverage, and you're not worried about spraying on the obstruction itself. But if you think about it, we just talked about what are common causes of fires in data centers. So when you're running the wire in these cable trays, you actually want to get spray of the sprinkler onto the cable tray to protect the wiring as well as below it to protect the floor area below. And FM 5-32 actually calls out to do that, to make sure that you're close enough to the obstruction that you're getting some of the spray of the sprinkler onto the cable tray as well as below it. So standard coverage sprinklers are commonly used because of the obstructions and the spacing requirements. Now, if you are using extended coverage sprinklers, since we're looking at a 0.15 or a 0.2 density, we offer our ECOH, our extended coverage ordinary hazard sprinklers. So now you're looking at your 11.2 or your 14K factor sprinklers.
Perfect.
For that type of application because they're listed with a 0.15 or a 0.2 density. Now, there's another type of option that you have for sprinklers as well, like the co-location and the managed service data centers. You don't always know when that building's built, whether that's going to be a data center or not.
Yeah.
They're commonly white box applications where tenants will lease the space afterwards. and they might be exposed to applications until the space is leased out to be a data center where they might put a ceiling into that location. So what we have is our flexible sprinkler and drop assembly, where we offer them in 4 to 5 foot lengths, and you can actually connect right to the fitting and not have to calculate any friction loss through the hose. And you have your flexible connection that'll drop 4 to 5 feet down to be put in the ceiling when the ceiling's put in place, and you don't have to perform any additional calculations for it.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So really, it's providing a lot of flexibility for the building owner, the tenant.
It
The tenant.
definitely is, yes.
Yeah. So now let's say we're designing a building, but we don't know 100%. What is it going to add? Is it going to end up finishing out as a data center? So what's a good system option that we could use to provide some flexibility for that type of application?
The best approach to that, if you have a white box application and you don't know whether it's going to eventually be leased out as a data center or not, is to go with a dry pipe sprinkler system.
Okay.
Because what we're seeing today is with data centers, like I stated earlier, that pre-action systems are being used. Whether it's a single or a double interlock pre-action, we're seeing both of them being used in data centers. So by going with a dry system, if a tenant moves in and they want to have a double interlock pre-action system, with the dry system, if they required a water delivery time, they're going to require the exact same water delivery time if it's a double interlock pre-action system. So you don't have to accommodate for that when you do the upgrade. Also, on top of that, the 30% increase in the design area.
Okay.
So dry systems require a 30% increase in the remote area. Double interlock pre-action systems require that same 30% increase in the remote area. So actually what we offer is what we call our dry to pre-action upgradable system.
Okay.
And a nice thing about the dry to pre-action upgradable system is that you can take it and you can just remove, you can see there we got a union below and a union above the A1 differential valve. And if you just loosen those unions, when a tenant moves in to upgrade to a pre-action system, you would remove that A1 differential valve at the unions, and then we offer kits to upgrade to a single interlock or a double interlock pre-action system that are just going to fit right back in here at the unions above and below. So it has the exact same takeout. It'll have a solenoid for single interlock or your double interlock electric electric, or it will have a solenoid and a pneumatic actuator if you're upgrading to a double interlock electric pneumatic pre-action system. And one of the great things about it is by installing a dry system initially, you don't require a release control panel, nor do you require the detection. So when you protect that white box area, if a tenant never leases a space and becomes a data center, well, you just leave the dry system in place for the life of the system. But if somebody does move in and they lease a space and they want a pre-action system, you can easily upgrade just by removing a couple pieces and putting new pieces in without having to re-perform the calculations. So with the dry to pre-action upgradable, that's one method for doing it. Another one would be the Total Pack 4 system.
Okay.
Total Pack 4 system will be our cabinet system. And with the Total Pack 4, it's actually even easier than the dry to pre-action upgradable system, because to upgrade from a dry to a pre-action system, all you got to do is change a couple dip switches within the cabinet and you just made the upgrade. So it offers so much more flexibility to start with a dry system in that type of application, because if you started with a wet system, then you would have to replace it, especially if you're going to a double interlock pre-action system. You don't have the 30% increase. You don't have the water delivery time if it ends up being required at a later time.
Okay. Yeah, that provides a lot of flexibility for just the building owner right there. Sometimes timing is everything, especially when you need a quick water delivery for the fire suppression. So if water delivery time is critical, what are some of the options that we have to speed up the activation of the system?
So if we're going with the dry system in the dry to pre-action upgradable system, Since you're not starting with a release control panel, you don't want to have to install that initially. We do have our mechanical E1 accelerator that can be installed to speed up the activation of the system to meet the water delivery time. And then when you upgrade it to a double interlock pre-action system, the same accelerator will work and you don't have to worry about not being able to meet the water delivery time.
Okay.
Now, on the other hand, though, if you already know initially that it's going to be a pre-action system, a double interlock pre-action system, and you require water delivery time, now you're already installing a release control panel. So we do offer our EA1 electronic accelerator, which would be a good option for that type of system and that type of data center, because you're always guaranteed to be able to activate your system within 4 seconds.
Okay. Yeah, two great options then.
Yes.
So last but not least, detection. So what are some common types of detections that we would actually see being used in a data center?
So the most common type of detection you see being used in a data center would be your air sampling detection.
Okay.
You want to be able to detect that fire quickly. So for example, the wiring's where a lot of the fires start. So when the wiring starts to overheat and the jacket of the wiring starts to emit smoke, that air sampling detection is going to detect that right away. And since it's pulling back to the unit, it's going to activate very quickly before the fire gets out of control to activate the system and be ready if the sprinklers get heated up and get activated. When you look at your air sampling detection, you have your symmetrical and your asymmetrical systems. If it's an exposed application, you'll just have holes that would be drilled within the piping to certain sizes based upon the manufacturer of the system that's being used. If you have a lay-in ceiling, there's capillary tubes that would come from those holes to go down into the ceiling below. Now, the piping that can be used for it, we actually offer our CPVC piping that's listed as air sampling detection. So with the Viking CPVC piping, whether it's an exposed system or whether it's using the capillary tubes for a lay-in ceiling, you have not only the pipe, but the fittings as well to complete the entire layout of the air sampling detection.
Okay. Wonderful. So that's a great way to wrap things up with detection. Data centers are always getting more denser, more critical. Um,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you, Caleb. Those were some great questions and very common, very hot topic these days with data centers. And if you have any additional questions, please always feel free to contact us at our toll-free number at 877-384-5464, or you can email us at techsvcs@vikingcorp.com. Thank you for joining our Tech Talk today, and we look forward to talking to you again in the future.